Liberty. Catalonia declares independence, but the Spanish government has the authority to take control of the region. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. Nearly a month after the controversial referendum that backed a split from Spain, the Catalan parliament has declared independence. There was celebration in the streets of Barcelona, but the Spanish government decided to fight back. The Senate authorized the use for the first time of Article 155 of the Constitution, which gives power to the central government to take control of the autonomous Catalonia region. That measure was often called a nuclear option. It removes the Catalan president, suspends his ministers, and Madrid assumes authority over the region's public, media, police, and finances. To discuss this and other topics, here with us is Paolo von Schirach, the president of the Global Policy Institute. Also with us, John Sitilides is a global risk analyst, and from Beijing, Qinduo is a political analyst for China Radio International. Welcome to all of you. Paolo, let me start with you. So, the Spanish parliament, at least the parliament in Catalonia, has voted overwhelmingly for independence, and Spain has invoked, as I said, this Article 155, which gives the government in Madrid authority to take over Catalonia. How much of a political crisis is Spain facing right now?
A really big one, because this is unprecedented. We have never seen, this article has never been invoked. There's never been any practical, real attempt of any of the regions of Spain to secede. And so we will see how this plays out. Hopefully it will play out peacefully because, of course, the Catalonians believe that they have a point because they held their referendum, even though a large majority of those who voted for independence, it was a minority of those who had the right to vote. So it's a kind of a mixed result. And the Spanish government simply had said, prior to that, that this referendum was illegitimate, had no legal ground to be held, and so the results are, null and void. So where are we going from here? Hopefully to a peaceful, solution of this, but this has never been tested before. We'll have to see.
John, isn't the problem here that those Catalans who support independence from Spain say, we won the referendum, others say, well, not so quick, this was not a fair referendum. We didn't hear from everybody. The percentage poll was very low. The Spanish government has called regional elections for December 21st in Catalonia. Can those elections defuse this crisis?
I don't believe so. We have the historic background to all of this, and the Catalonians have never felt for centuries that they've been part of the political nation state of Spain. As Paolo mentioned, you have the democratic politics playing out in terms of a majority of a minority that voted for independence. But I think there are two crises here, Anand. One is the political viability of the Spanish nation state as we've known it in the modern era. But I think we're also seeing a microcosm of this phenomenon of micro-nationalism that may begin to afflict other EU nations. And you're seeing this with Brexit and the possibility that Scotland will seek independence from the United Kingdom. You have other regions and other EU countries who, especially with the EU as a political union, say, why are we serving two masters? There's a capital of the nation state, but there's Brussels. And Brussels is increasingly dominating the decisions and the lifestyles of European citizens. I think that's playing out here also.
Right, and also have the Basques in Spain who've been calling for independence for a very long time. But before we move on, I just want to get onto something here, John. Would the election on December 21st also be seen as some kind of referendum?
I think a lot of it depends on what happens between now and then. And what I'm afraid of is you've got political leaders on both sides in Madrid and in Catalonia who don't see any way out of their positions. They're almost absolutists, and they've basically established maximalist positions. How did the Catalan leaders now back down with this tremendous support that we've seen from the people who decided to vote and come out in the streets? The minority that withheld their vote, they've lost a lot of the leverage over here. But at the same time, Madrid has to stand up for the sake of an effort to maintain Spanish unity. They have the backing of almost every EU state and the United States. But this is going to play out in very, very complex ways over the next several weeks.
Right, and Paolo, as you point out, this is unprecedented.
Yes.
But if the Catalans get their way, it does set a precedent.
Oh, look, it really does. And quite frankly, I don't think this will happen. I'm not sure how this matter will be settled. hopefully, as I said, peacefully. But I don't think, I just don't sense that there is any way in which the Spanish political establishment, from the king down to the prime minister, will say, okay, after all, on second thought, the Catalans can go. No way. I don't think there's any way in which they will accept it. They can accept certainly some intermediate position, assuming that people move away from their maximum positions of enhanced autonomies for Catalonia and perhaps other regions, including, as you mentioned, the Basque region, which is a historic problem, probably even bigger one than Catalonia because of the terrorism for many decades. But it is notable, however, that nobody in Europe wanted to touch this. The Catalans have said, please come help us, be an intermediary, be kind of an arbiter. They asked several European countries, they asked Brussels. Nobody wants to touch this. Nobody wants to lift the lid on this because other countries may be vulnerable to situations like Catalonia. Even very recently, in the last several days, there were non-binding, just expressions of autonomous desires in the two most developed regions of northeastern Italy, Lombardy and Veneto. They voted overwhelmingly for something, not necessarily for independence, but certainly for larger autonomies. So kind of like the Catalonian bug, catching up. Do you want to encourage this thing? And then you have Scotland, and then you have, there's a huge Hungarian minority in Romania.
Yeah.
You want to start opening all this stuff.
I know. I looked online. There is a huge list of people all over Europe who want independence. Let's go to Beijing and get the view of Qinduo Xu. Qinduo, I was looking at this, and one forgets sometimes that China is a very diverse country with disparate peoples all over. Yet, as we heard from President Xi Jinping during the recent 19th Communist Party Congress, unity is central to China. So as you sit there in Beijing, what does it look like in Catalonia?
Well, most people would say it, we see the discussion of legality on the surface, whether the referendum was recognized as legal, and also the Article 155 by the Constitution, which says the referendum was not illegal. And on the second level, people see is really, a lot of people are interested in this idea of principle, self-determination. And then people say, if that's the principle, and then there's justice, there's justification for the Catalonia people to go independent. And then people see there's frankly speaking, hypocrisy for Western nations, like European nations, including the US probably. People say they used to support self-determination. And now when it comes to self-determination, people are balking at the independence move in Catalonia. And of course, for China, China in general, people don't accept or buy such idea of self-determination, partly because we have our own problem, obviously. And almost there's a unanimity that is this is not an issue to to go to the poll to solve the problem, whether you want to break up from the nation. No.
Yeah, John, I just wanted you to take a listen to what the Spanish Prime Minister had to say.
The Catalan parliament has approved something that for the vast majority of people not only goes against the law, but is a criminal act, which means declaring something that is not possible, the independence of Catalonia.
If you look at this from a purely legal point of view, does the Prime Minister have a point there in saying that, look, we've invoked this article of the Constitution, first time it's being done, but we're right?
Look, democracy is not simply about elections and people venting their feelings positively or negatively. It has to be premised on the rule of law. So even where you have the issue of self-determination, there has to be a legal process that the body politic agrees to, or else you're going to have rupturing nations all around the world. So rule of law is a principle that's paramount here, and I'm afraid this is where the Catalonians have a weak argument in terms of their position vis-a-vis Madrid.
Do you agree with that, Paolo? Because how do we actually determine the will of the Catalan?
Well, look, here's my take is this: are the Catalonian really this oppressed minority, who are being squeezed by the evil Spaniards? Catalonia is one of the, if not the wealthiest, certainly one of the wealthiest regions in Spain. They may argue there may be a legitimate argument of how you apportion costs and taxes and government benefits and all that. That happens everywhere between whether New York York gets more than Colorado or Louisiana here in the U.S. in terms of federal dollar. These are legitimate arguments to have. But honestly, with my great respect for the Catalonians, I don't think that they qualify as an oppressed minority that desperately has to seek self-determination in order to preserve their identity. They have their own language, their own parliament, their own almost everything. So yes, they're part of a state, and they think they're better off not being there. But the Prime Minister, back to your point, has a point. The Spanish Constitution does not allow this. Period. So if you uphold the law and the Constitution as is, what the Catalonians did is illegal. And he has every right to invoke this article of the Constitution and essentially dissolve the powers of the Generalidad, of the regional government, and take over. We'll see what happens. Again, as I said, I hope all this happens peacefully.
John, as you pointed out earlier, there's a complication here, and that is there's a Spanish central government, there's also Brussels, the European Union. In fact, there was a tweet from the European Council President, Donald Tusk, in which he said, for the European Union, nothing changes. Spain remains our only interlocutor. I hope the Spanish government favors force of argument and not argument of force.
I think this is the beginning of a years-long, possibly decades-long process of probable fracturing of the European Union as a political entity. It's been quite successful as a free trade zone, bringing largely economic benefits to most, if not all, of its members to one degree or another. But the political unity argument is going to be a very difficult one to uphold. Almost nobody in Europe considers him or herself a European first. They're Spaniards, they're Catalans, they're French, they're Germans. And this is something that Brussels has refused to acknowledge. And you're going to see, I think, increasing movements for independence from nation-state capitals as long as Brussels is involved in a greater and greater portion of decision-making and everyday life of the citizens of Europe.
What do you make of that? Does Brussels have a veto on this?
Well, here's the thing, that if regions within countries like Catalonia or Scotland or Northern Italy or the Basque Country or Corsica in France at some point had independentist aspirations, if they think, okay, goody, we get out of France, but we still have our seat at the table in Brussels, it doesn't work that way at all. They will have to essentially become a new applicant and be on the back of the queue, and if they, as a newly independent state, assuming that they get there, they would have to reapply as a new entity, and it's not they have some kind of a legacy right, because they used to be part of a member state, that automatically they become a new member state. It doesn't work that way at all. But more broadly, I think he's right, John is right, in saying Europe as a political project is quite questionable. It's called the European Union, but it is not. Don't be fooled by the label. It's not a state. It's not a federation. It is something else, and it's not quite clear the level of allegiance that people feel for this thing. But be that as it may, the Catalonians should harbor no illusions about the idea that they could get out of Spain but still have the privileges and the rights of a member of the European Union. Okay. They will have to start all over.